Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Dad, do you wrestle with patience? Do you want things to hurry up and be done? Already get there. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Are you driving like a maniac right now, in fact, while you listen to this? Or are you listening to this podcast on 2x speed while slamming your caffeine of choice? Well, you know what? Today, we're going to be getting into impatience. So relax, slow it down just a little bit. We're in a series based on the book that Kent wrote called Don't Bench Yourself. And the fourth temptation that can cause us to want to bench ourselves is impatience. So get the most out of this, relax, let's just be together. We're going to get through this together, and we're not going to be in a hurry. Seriously. This is a great chapter. We all struggle at times, whether or not you're, an actual patient person or not. There are times in our lives where impatience gets in the way. And if it can cause us to want to pull out of the game and bench ourselves, then we need to be very aware of that. So how you doing, Kent? Good to see you, buddy boy.
I'm doing great. And sometimes we talk about subjects where I feel like I'm going to have to lean on other people's experience and knowledge. I'm going to have to quote like Tim Keller's book. I'm going to have to go to the Bible. I'm going to need some other resource in order to make sense of the topic. However, on the topic of impatience, I am actually a bona fide global expert. It would be hard for you to find someone who has more street cred at impatience than Kent Evans. I know my limits, but being impatient ain't one of them. So you've come to the right place. If you're looking for an impatience expert, you found him. Before we dive in, I want to remind our listeners, Lawson, of two things. Number one, we love the folks at Range Leather. We're recording this episode in late October. It'll come out at some point in November. So you still have time, if you're listening to this in real time, to snag an amazing Christmas gift for your loved ones from rangeleather.com. That's rangeleather.com.
Hey, your friendly neighborhood podcast editor here to let you know that as of this weekend, live as you're listening to the show, the Elbert wallet is back in stock at rangeleather.com. They've got all three beautiful colors of Horween leather and, in addition to the jewelry line this week, the Cascade bracelet. Go check one out and enjoy the rest of the show.
Because Kyle Koster is amazing, the CEO of Range Leather. Yep. You can save 15% on your order by just typing in the letters MJ15. That stands for Manhood Journey 15, 15% off your next order at Range Leather. Go to rangeleather.com. Secondly, I want to remind our listeners, I was just at an event this past weekend, Lawson, with 350 men at it. And they were amazing. Way to go, Chuck and Kyle and the team at Restoration Church. You guys do an amazing job of putting on an event. I want to remind you, there's probably hundreds of guys listening to this show, like the guys at Restoration Church. You have a group of men that you're around on a regular basis. It might be your baseball team. It might be your small group. It may be your Sunday school. It may be your a group of your home group that you do through your church. If you think the book Don't Bench Yourself would be an asset for that group, and you guys want to walk through it together, get massive, like 60 and 70% discounts off retail by buying a dozen or 24 of these books all at once at manhoodjourney.org. Go to manhoodjourney.org, and we can sell you bulk copies of Don't Bench Yourself, and we will ship them out in a flat hurry. So if you're impatient and you want to go snag a bulk package of books, don't drive to Louisville. Just go to the website, and then we'll ship them out super fast. Lawson, as we're talking about the topic of Don't Bench Yourself, I've actually had two guys in our listening audience reach out to me privately and ask questions about the phrase, don't bench yourself. So I want to clear one thing up in case you're confused by this. We're about halfway through, by the way, the series on this book. So we've been talking this week and the last few weeks about the things that can cause us to bench ourselves. And then coming next week, we're going to start to talk about how to get off the bench if you've put yourself on the bench, or how to stay off the bench if you're tempted to go on. So we're wrapping up the 4 big problems or temptations. And next week, we're going to start talking about the solution. But a couple guys have asked me, when you say, Kent, don't bench yourself, do you mean like don't ever make a change in life? What if I'm at a dead-end job? Or what if I feel like I need to move my family to another city, or I feel like there's something new for me to do, and I've got to quit one thing and start a second thing? Is that benching myself? Like, do I just need to hang on to this job till I die?
Right.
And I tell those guys, hey, I think you're mixing the metaphor, and so we're going to clear that up today. When I'm talking about benching yourself, what I'm talking about is the important things of life, like being a husband, being a dad, being financially responsible, being sexually pure, the things we want to do as men that are core to our identity and our work that God has given us to do as godly men. So Ephesians 2:10, he said he prepared good works in advance for us to do. So I'm talking about not career choices and not like where you live. I'm talking about how you live and what you choose to do with your time. Don't quit being a dad just so you can be good at golf. Don't quit being a husband so you can go and chase somebody who's not your wife. Don't quit being, a responsible, productive member of your church so you can go be a gossip and a negative guy who tears people down. Like, don't quit the important God-given things in your life to go chase something either illicit or wrong, or just second class and unimportant. That's what we mean when we say don't bench yourself. And there's a lot of ways that impatience can cause us to want to pull ourselves out of these important games of life. Lawson, get us started on this topic of impatience.
Yeah, I think being on the bench means you're out of the game, and the game is not your job. The game is not your church. The game itself is, we can actually put ourselves on the bench by doing too much in our job, which means we're avoiding the game. The game is being a dad, being a follower, being a great friend. And so if we are experiencing this moment where the temptation is to go sit back down on the bench, that means we're not out there doing those good works, like you mentioned, and like Ephesians 2:10, talks about good works. Those are where, impatience can get in the way. And so maybe we're looking for results. And for me, I think sometimes where, something's going on in the lives of, my family members or with me. And, I'm wanting to maybe make a change or do something better or do more of something that I know is part of the good works, but the results are just kind of not coming, or I'm like, man, things should be changing by now. And so impatience gets in the way, and I feel like, well, I guess it's just not going to come. I guess it's just not going to happen. Right. And, that's me walking over toward the bench. Maybe you don't necessarily always go sit down on the bench and just totally give up. But where we are after God's heart and we see where he's leading us, but it's just taking too long. It's just taking so long, in our opinion, that it can feel like, it's getting the best of us. And maybe we do begin to feel like maybe I should just sit this one out. That's what I think we're talking about, because work or your men's group at church or something you're doing that is good, but it's causing you to say, I know where I can go and feel productive. I know where I can go and spend my time and see something happening. Because over here, where I'm having this conversation with my kid and they're just not listening, or me and my wife are going through a struggle and she's just not open to change, or she's just, consumed with whatever else. And maybe it's, time for a pause to regroup, but that does not excuse us from the game. and does not allow us to go sit down on the bench and just take our glove off.
Well, what I'd like to do, Lawson, is list a few ways that I think are really practical, very specific, and that a lot of guys listening to this show today will be able to relate to. So let me just take a stab at a few things that may be happening to you where you've given effort for a season, and that season might have been, 2 weeks, or it might have been 2 decades. It may have been a long time, little time, but you feel like it's time for results, but they're not there. So for example, you may have been walking the last several years through some life choices that your teenage children are making, your teenage son or daughter is making, and they continue to make unwise choices in an area. And you think, man, isn't it about time for some of this to have sunken into their brain? And you're about to give up because you're like, "Oi, I've done it for 2 years. They're still not learning. I'm tempted to give up." You're gonna bench yourself as a dad. Your teenage kid keeps making choices, or you've continued to try to love your spouse, and you just don't feel like that love is being returned. You continue to try to pour, good, healthy fertilizer and water into your relationship with your spouse, but nothing seems to be growing. Or you've been working at a job for a long time and several people have gotten a promotion and you've been passed over several times and you're like, man, when will it be my turn? And you've done a good job. You've gotten good marks. You're an A employee. You've gotten good performance reviews and you think, man, isn't it time for me now to get that pay bump or for me to get that flexibility that I've been after or that title I've been after? Or you've been wrestling with a besetting sin for a year or 5 or 10 or 30. And you think, man, isn't it about time for this to be behind me? Like, can I just not be greedy all the time? Like I've been greedy since I was 11. I took that kid's lunch money and here I am, I'm 41. I'm still tempted to be greedy. And you think, man, when will this be over? And so the temptation, I think, Lawson, for us as dads is, especially if we're kind of like, a big portion of our audience is international, but the majority of our audience that's listening right now is going to be an American dad. And uniquely American are these ideas of independence and growth and profit and performance and KPIs, right? As soon as I say KPI or metric, I know they're all the business guys who are listening just start to shrink and they're like, oh, this feels like a quarterly review, And we think in terms of those things that we can measure. And so the temptation for, especially if you're a business guy, or even if you are a blue collar guy and you got to go fix so many cars, or you got to dig so many holes, or you got to get so much of that road built today, you got a goal. There's like something that you have to get done by a certain time. And so you're used to measuring progress and performance. And the problem with being a godly dad is most of the stuff that is the most important cannot be measured. And definitely, it often can't be measured in a short amount of time. I heard a guy say one time, and he said, this is either going to be the most liberating and exciting statement you've ever heard or the most depressing and fearful statement you've ever heard. He said, parenting is one of the few jobs that you do where by the time you see how it's been done, it's too late to do anything about it. Man, that can either cause you to want to drive your car off the road, or it can cause you to be super excited to just put in the work and let the results fall, because impatience usually is tied to a time that we've established that may or may not be God's timeline.
Yeah, and we look to earthly means on measuring something, and are we making progress? Galatians is a good place to land for some encouragement. Galatians 5:22-24. As I read through this, you tell me, how do you measure this so that, especially like you said, we Americans,
right?
The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, underline patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Can we measure how well we're doing on having the fruit of the Spirit that is producing joy? Sorta, maybe. How about kindness? Can we look back at ourselves and go, I have, felt God's presence in my life, and I am a kinder, more gentle person. I have a little bit more self-control, but can we assign some KPIs to those and measure them daily and go visit our monthly report, to see how much patience we have in September over last September of 2023? It's like
my year-over-year patience growth
your
indicator,
variance to prior year patience scale, right?
Right.
But that's the call. Be the fruit of the Spirit. Have fruit of the Spirit growing in our lives. And then Galatians 6:9 speaks to me because it is hard, man. It's hard to have a job. It's hard to do all the things that are coming at us and handle it. And then the family dynamics and kids and just so much is happening, right? And we can feel like it's not working, or it's not working fast enough, or good enough. But Galatians 6:9 says, and let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. And so a key message there is, a couple things. Don't grow weary of doing good. We can get tired of our job. We can get tired of the toil, of like just having a hard day. That is different than growing weary of doing good. That to me means you are investing in that relationship with your teenager who just doesn't seem to listen. But it's just not going like you thought. And so
that's right.
It says, don't grow weary of doing good. In due season, it will happen. Just don't give up.
And if you look at that phrase in Galatians 6:9, and you see the phrase due season, you're going to see that the what it's basically suggesting is that in a time unique unto you. And so that is wild when you think about it. So essentially, if there's 8 billion people on planet Earth and we all loved the Lord and we're all following his plan for our lives, he would say, look, I got a progress and a path and a season for you and you and you. And he would say it 8 billion times.
Right.
And the challenge with that, obviously, right, is we can't measure it. If I told you, hey, I'm going to hit your thumb with a hammer for 5 minutes, it would be way easier for you to tolerate that than if I said, I'm going to start hitting your thumb with a hammer and I'll stop when I feel like it. Because mentally, you go, okay, cool, 5 minutes. I just grin and bear it, hang in there, right? But if I just tell you this is infinite, this is unending, and I'm the one who decides. The only way that feels okay, right? The only way that feels okay is if you completely trust me. And if you know, there's a reason why I'm hitting your thumb with a hammer over and over again, and eventually you might figure that out. If you believe all that about me, then you'll be like, all right, I'll hang in there because I trust the character of the one who isn't quite delivering on the schedule I think he ought to deliver on.
Hey, Dad, do you ever feel tempted to pull yourself out of the game of life and just warm the bench? To sit it out while your family steps in and picks up the slack? I know what it's like to want to ride the bench and withdraw. This can be the easy path to take, but we know it's not the best one. So, the engineers at Father on Purpose Laboratories have created a revolutionary new product, the Game Time Helmet. You put it on and it relentlessly screams in your ears, "Hey, pal, keep your head in the ball game!" It comes in an array of colors and even has an adjustable chin strap to lock it on tight. I use one every day. I've even started letting my teenage kids wear it. It only has one volume setting, blaring. Now, we're joking. Sorry. This product doesn't really exist. However, what does exist is the new book, Don't Bench Yourself by Kent Evans. It's a short read packed with powerful lessons, and as a bonus, it does not incessantly yell at you. Snag a copy of Don't Bench Yourself and get back in the game today.
Wow. Dude, you just gave me a huge memory about don't give up. real quick, in Marine Corps, where we were out in the desert, we were training for a deployment, getting in shape, and it was like a lot of preparing, a lot of packing, a lot of going over lists and SOPs, and even before we started moving into like the I forget what it stood for, but MOUT, something urban terrain, where we practiced in a fake city, and you got to, little things like you got to pack on your back and carrying a weapon, and you got to make up ground going upstairs. Wow. You got to be in shape for that. And you got to figure out how to not run through a door and fall because you're not used to having a big pack on your back. Little things that you just learn through practice. But early on, you made me think about when you don't know when it's going to end, something that it was on purpose that was done to me, and we would also do it to our platoons, was on a run. We knew that we had X amount of time, but the guys running didn't. And the best way to understand who is ready to fall out, who's ready to quit, was to start heading toward home and even get to within eyesight of the barracks, and then take a left or a right instead of going straight toward home.
Wow. And
people, I'm guilty too. We all felt it. When you don't know where it's going to stop or how long it's going to take to get there, what would happen is you start getting a little bit of pep in your step. You see the house, you see the barn, and we're getting closer. And then the platoon sergeant takes a left, and everybody, you can hear the groans. And sure enough, a third of the people just give up and start walking. They don't run anymore.
Wow.
And it's a valuable life lesson to say, who do you trust?
Right.
Where are you placing your when is this going, like, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but like, trust God. It's taken longer than you thought. Or maybe all of a sudden you took a left and you're like, hang on a second, I thought we were almost there. But God has something more in store. And when we trust Him with the route, we trust Him with the timing, then it's like the pressure's off. We're along, we're going along, we're following along. And whether it takes 5 days or 5 years, it's not up to us. And so growing in patience is less, I think, about how do we measure progress? How do we understand what's going on? Maybe we don't understand what's going on.
Right.
Patience is more a lesson in knowing who's in charge, knowing who's in control, than it is how quickly things are happening. Does that make sense?
It does. And then in that context, what you're valuing is you're valuing the process rather than the outcome. You're valuing the growing of your muscles and the diligence to the task at hand versus the completion or the end. Or another way to say it is you start to value patience over performance. It's like, okay, I know I'm in this season that is a difficult season. April and I are walking through a season like that right now, and we're a couple years in to something that we really don't know how it ends. And frankly, we don't know if it ends. Right? So not only do we not know when, we don't even know if it will end. And so then that just changes how you pray about it. It changes how you think about each day. It changes where you get your source of gratification and joy. And it changes just how you possess yourself every day in this place where you go, man, I'm going to do today again, even though I don't quite yet see a light at the end of the tunnel. And we've got to accept the fact that the fruit of the Spirit, those things you listed from Galatians 5, almost all of them, I suppose probably you could say all 9 of what's listed as the fruit, comes as a result of the Spirit's work in our life, not just like we go out and man up and get more patience or go man up and get more kindness.
Yeah.
It's God's Spirit in our life. And often the way He puts it into our life is through its exact opposite. In other words, like what I mean by that is the way you're going to get patient is when God slows things down.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he may slow things down to test you. He may slow things down to grow you. He may slow things down, and this is sometimes mind-blowing to people who know it's a good outcome. Why would God slow down the growth of your business that you started? Because it's a little too early, and if it grows like a hockey stick right now,
right,
you're going to become an arrogant jerk who thinks he can't fail. And so God's like, you know what? I'm going to actually pull that back a little bit. Even though it's a good outcome, sure, why not? If your business is growing, by the way, go to manhoodjourney.org/donate. Go to donate, give us some of your hard-earned money, and we'll reach a lot more dads. Feel free. Like, we love guys who have growth in their businesses. Those are the dudes who support our ministry. So, like, it can be a great outcome, but the timing of it can be a little dicey, right? Which is why we see a lot of guys who go into like pro sports and go from like age 17 to age 19, and now they're worth $20 million or $15 million. They often make unwise choices, not because they're necessarily bad people, but because the wealth came so fast, they don't quite know what to do with it. And so sometimes God will withhold a blessing from you if that blessing would actually, curve your spirit inward or pervert your desires or make you irresponsible. So sometimes the reason we're not getting results is because we're not ready for them.
And, this is a separate but related point, is that God may be doing work that we don't realize. We don't see it. Like we're coming at it from a lens of the dad, looking at it with expectations that we have in mind. And in fact, man, this is a sad story, but literally today I was on the phone with a friend of mine who woke up Friday morning that his wife had passed away in the bed.
Ooh, wow.
Good buddy of mine, heart of gold. His
Terrible.
wife was just, this wonderful, loving, crazy kind of life of the party. Real vivacious and very young. They were both, they've been married 30 years or more, but began at an early age. So sort of around my age, and it was totally unexpected. Well, there had been, typical teenage struggle with one of their kids, and nothing unusual, but I've had it where there are times when I didn't feel very close to one of the girls, or something was going on in their life that was just overwhelming and kind of consuming. And so it felt, well, it was more than a feeling. There was a bit of a distance, that had grown.
Sure.
Well, so the day before, this mom had written a letter to her younger child and said something to the well, let's work on this together, love you, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Don't know exactly what was in the note, but the next morning she was on her way to school and wrote on the refrigerator whiteboard, "Thank you for the note, Mom, we are good, and I love you."
Wow.
And that was the last note that she wrote to her mom.
Wow.
And God was in there. God was working on their relationship. It wasn't because she wrote her this letter. It was because of the time and attention and the love that was shown. And even have things going on in our life that prevent us from maybe responding in the time that is wanted by someone else, or in the way that maybe us dads are looking for from our child or from our wife. That doesn't mean that we look at it and go, well, I'm just frustrated and I'm impatient and nothing's happening. It's not going my way. I'm going to take my glove off and go sit on the bench. I'm out of this game.
Right. That is a powerful story, man. Like, I'm really sorry to hear about your friend whose wife passed away. Well, after the show, let me know who that is, and I'll be praying for them, or whatever you can share. What I find fascinating is, to your point, when we don't see what God's up to, eventually the temptation is just to take over and do it ourselves, right? So like we go, you know what? I've waited for this for a year, 10 or 20 or however long, so I'm going to take some action that I think will move the plot forward. The classic example of this in Scripture, right, is Abram. when God tells him, you're going to have a son, and he's going to be, the heir. And this is 20-something years later. And he's like, well, okay, so where's the kid, man? Let's go. Like, I heard the promise. My wife heard it. And his wife says, I got an idea. I want you to sleep with the maid, and we'll go that route. And now we're still, thousands of years later, dealing with this split between these two families that, has resulted in strife for thousands of years because, Abram ran out of patience. He ran out of trust in God. He decided he was going to do it his own way. We look back on that stuff and we're like, oh, come on, man, if you just waited a couple more years, because we have the benefit of hindsight. But when you don't have the benefit of hindsight and you're moving forward through the timeline of life, sometimes you just finally go, I'm going in. I'm going to go in. And it's the wrong time to go in. And if you just waited one more day, or if you just waited one more hour, or just waited one more month, God would have moved and made all this make sense. But we've got to learn how to be patient. What I find fascinating, Lawson, is that lady got the benefit of something that sometimes we never get the benefit of. And that is like a good, clean, plot point in the story that resolves a lot of things. It may not make everything perfect, but it's and the verse it makes me think of that we happen to already have in today's show notes is Hebrews 11:13. And this is where I'd love to kind of land the plane for most dads today. We are going to be tested, and God wants to work in us patience, because it's a fruit of the Spirit. And when we are patient, we are most like God. There's a lot of verses. You go look them up. We wait for things with patience, Romans 8:25, with patience bearing with one another, Ephesians 1. It says even in 1 Timothy 1, Jesus Christ might display his perfect patience. So one of the reasons God wants us to become more patient is because it's one of his characteristics. And as we are more patient, we show the world a better picture of him. So it's not just for our benefit or, there's a lot of reasons. One of them is when we're patient, we're more like God. And in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, some will call that the Hall of Faith, right? It lists all these people who did amazing things with and for God. And then there's this verse in verse 13 that, like we said earlier about parenting being a long-term game, this verse can either inspire you and free you up in this area of patience, or this verse can be really disappointing and kind of depressing if you think about it. It goes like this. After listing all these heroes of the faith, the people who you'd think,
right,
if anybody were going to get, God's like secret behind the veil, hey man, I got you covered. If anybody were going to get it, it's, Abraham and Noah and Moses and David and Gideon, however, in Hebrews 11, verse 13, it says this: these famous people, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. These people, these heroes of the faith, died without their faith plots being fully resolved on earth. And what's fascinating about that to me is, yet they're described as people who were faithful. And so for us, we've got to have, as Hebrews says earlier in that chapter, faith is the evidence of things not seen. It's tied to hope. It's tied to future. And so for the guy who is currently sitting on the bench of life in some significant way, you've stopped being a dad, or you've just been, I heard a guy say this weekend at an event, what a great line. He said, you don't have to leave the home to be absent. It's a good line. That's a great line.
Right.
You don't have to leave the home to be absent, because you can just be, mentally dialed out or in your phone or on your fantasy football, list. So dad, if you've been tempted to be absent, you've been tempted to pull away, you've been tempted to withdraw as a husband or as a dad, remember these heroes of the faith who did not get the thing they were hoping for. But it's almost as if they did because they saw it and greeted it from afar. So, for example, we're walking through some issues with my wife, with her health, and I look at that and I go, man, we might get resolution on that on earth. We might get resolution tomorrow. We might get resolution in a week or a month or a year.
Yeah, I'd love for you to.
I would love for that. We might live 3 more years and Jesus comes back. We might live 30 more years and never get resolution. I have no idea what tomorrow holds in that area. But here's what I do know for sure. For sure. She absolutely will be healed. It either is going to happen sooner or later in this life or not. But there's coming a day when she will be totally healed. No more tears, no more crying, no more pain, no more sadness. And for sure, she'll be healed in heaven. Now, do I want her to live 30 pain-filled years until that happens? Of course not. However, I can greet that day from afar. I can greet that day now and say, man, that's going to be an awesome day. That's going to be an awesome day. And even if I don't get it here, it might make for some dicey moments in between, difficult days, dark nights of the soul, but I know I can look ahead because these heroes of the faith did it in Hebrews 11.
Dude, well said. I'm going to wrap up with a thought and get you to talk about what's God doing to the mechanic, because I think it reflects there are times in our lives where we're dealing with something and it may not feel like progress is being made, or maybe we don't see it. And that doesn't mean that God is not at work on us. And if we've got our hands, like what you wrote in the book was, you may have your hands in it and you're getting bloody knuckles, working on the machine. Like, let's not forget, 1 Timothy 1:16 says, "But I receive mercy for this reason, that in me, as the foremost, Jesus Christ might display his perfect patience as an example to those who were to believe in him for eternal life." What I hear from that is, God's been so patient with me over and over. Every day, he's got to renew his patience in Lawson Brown because I am just not there. And so his perfect patience, how can that be a reflection that I present as a fruit of the Spirit as I'm working on fill in the blank, whatever that machine is, whether it be work or your family or yourself? Talk about how God is at work on the mechanic.
For sure. A few years ago, I met a guy, well, it's probably 15 years ago now, 20, guy named Greg Diedrich. Greg used to be president of a big business. He just came out with a new book, by the way. I think it's called Living in the Spirit, published by Living on the Edge. Shout out to Chip Ingram and our friends over there. And Greg has been like what I would call the intermittent mentor, right? Anytime I can grab coffee with him, I do. And he travels a bit, so I'll catch him a couple times a year. And one time he described for me, early in the Manhood Journey launch, he goes, "Kent, man, you're going to have your hands in the Manhood Journey machine, and they're going to get all bloodied, and you're going to be tweaking the machine, and the belt's going to come off, and you're going to be twisting the wrench, and you're going to yell at that machine." You know, it's going to be like the classic mechanic, you know, stupid machine. He goes, "And all that's good. Like, get your hands bloody, work on the machine. That's your job. That's your job. However, don't lose sight of what God's doing to the mechanic." So just using a real easy practical example, you might be under some financial stress right now. And as part of that, you got to work on that. You got to roll your credit cards over to the 0%. You got to pay your bills. You got to like tighten up the budget. You got to not eat out. You got to get water instead of Cokes. Okay. You got to take some action. And that's like working on the machine. You got to make decisions that make the machine go so y'all don't get completely homeless and live in a van down by the river. Okay, so you got to make sure you're dealing with the financial issues at hand. However, what's probably happening inside of you is you're learning lessons about financial management. You probably, I mean, come on, you probably won't be in the exact same position again if you can keep it from happening. I did something this weekend, Lawson, fascinating. I was with 2 different groups of people. One was 50 guys and another was 80 guys. And I asked all of them to raise their hand. I said, "Hey, raise your hand if you've ever had financial trouble." If finances have been a problem, about 95% of the hands went up. Okay. Now I said, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. Put your hand down. Or no, I said it the other way. I said, keep your hand up if you can look back and trace the financial problem to a stupid decision you made. And 95% of those hands stayed up. Right? And so sometimes we have financial calamity. Right. You lose a job suddenly, or big market turn, or 2008, COVID, you have some big, massive financial calamity. Most of the guys I was with over 100 guys, and I would say 90 of them could trace their financial problem back to a poor decision. Well, in that process, God's working on your mind and your heart so you can learn that lesson so you don't stumble over the same exact problem twice. So for us as dads, we discipline our child in anger, and that creates distance with our child. And then we realize that happened. Yeah. We go apologize to them. And then the next time we wait a day or two before we let our smart mouth cause another problem, right? God's working on the mechanic. Yeah. And he's changing us by our circumstances and if we'll let him, like if we lean into that, we'll change better and better. But if we just always think that the problem is the machine, we're never going to figure it out, man. We're never going to figure it out. So the problem is often the mechanic, and God wants to use the circumstances of your life and my life to make the mechanic better and more like God.
I love that. So guys, here we are talking about why we should not be benching ourselves. Don't bench yourself. A great book by Ken Evans. Y'all go get it. The first was fear. Then we talked about shame. Then we talked about criticism. And then today, impatience. What we're going to go to now in this series is how do we get back in the game? Maybe we're not seated on the bench and we're planted and no plans to come off, but maybe you felt like you needed a break. Maybe you just ran over there to sit down and you know what? You looked around and go, I've been here longer than I thought I was going to be, and now it's time. So now we're going to get into, for the next handful of episodes, we're going to talk about how do we get back in the game.
That's right. Like this guy named Russell Polvino, who came to our web store recently and snagged the Anger-Free Dad digital course, which is directly connected to patience, He said he's a father of 5 adult children and a grandfather of 12, which I love this because he hasn't given up on becoming a better dad, even though his kids are all adults. Way to go, Russell. And he said that anger's gotten in the way. He's done some anger management work before, but wants to remain vigilant to protect his family and his witness. His goals are centered on learning and obtaining new tools to sharpen his awareness. So be like Russell. Stay with us for the next several weeks as we unlock how to not bench yourself. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you next week. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in.
We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed.
Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.